Well, tonight, net neutrality, now the official U.S. policy. What exactly does it mean, and why are open internet activists so happy tonight and Republicans in the House so upset? Also, did the FCC make the right call, and why was the president so invested? Our panel, it sounds off. And then Chris Christie's real pension problem. Yes, the judge says that he has to find $1.5 billion to pay public employees. They say he broke the law. And yes, the state is hard-pressed to find that cash, but it's Christie's real pension problem, Christie himself. You'll hear from the governor in his own words. Plus, from Blitzkrieg Bop to RFL, Marky Ramone of the Ramones joins us in studio talking about his battles, not only with addiction here, but also the band's success as the great American punk band, leading them all the way to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we start tonight in Washington, where the FCC, they voted to impose new regulations when it comes to internet providers. Now, the rules, they would apply to wired and wireless internet connections, and they include major restrictions for providers who would be prevented from slowing down or blocking access to legal content, applications, or even services. The FCC would not regulate the price of internet services and would not impose new taxes on government-mandated fees. However, opponents of the measure fear price regulations and new taxes would come at some point down the road. The rules, they impact companies like AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon, and the rules say that any company that provides a broadband connection to your phone or your home must act in the, quote, public interest. Now, the whole idea of net neutrality is that website or videos load at about the same speed. Now, FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler said prior to today's vote that, quote, the internet is simply too important to allow broadband providers to be the ones here making the rules. All right, let's make this our first debate topic tonight and bring in our panel. Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos, as well as a professor at NYU and ubiquitous on all media platforms. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly, as we say, the good one, a Republican strategist who was not fighting on the Falklands. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent.
Neither was I.
Yes. What do you think? They get it right today?
They did exactly the right thing. And to try to break this down, we have common carriers, which is what they made them, all the time. For example, it wouldn't be weird if all of a sudden United Airlines said, we're not going to fly Republicans. There are certain kinds of communication, transportation things that say you can't distinguish, discriminate, make changes. We regulate that. That's because they're so important to everybody's well-being. The notion that the internet is now finally going to be free from corporate manipulation is very good news for anyone who uses the internet.
The devil's advocate said, though, Dominic, that, hey, if I'm a provider and I'm providing a service here, I should be able to have tiers, or I should be able to have a fast lane and a slow lane, depending on how much you're willing to pay. They say that's just capitalism here, and then the government is acting as Big Brother. What would you say to that?
I don't know about the Big Brother part, but in the best interest of the public, as the chairman argued, and as Mr. Brodsky just very clearly articulated, I agree with you tonight, starting out. And so, Richard, I think this is a good idea, and frankly, I don't understand why you would be against this. One, it's going to be appealed in court. Two, if the next president doesn't like this, they can come in and ease this out. But what's wrong with protecting services on a level playing field where it impacts the public?
And we like to think that we have a level playing field in most of the areas where our businesses operate. And I'm not just talking about the internet, I'm talking about business in general. But in most cases, we don't. In most cases, the business landscape is tilted towards the biggest players in whatever the field happens to be. They're the ones who have the capital and the resources to influence the policies, and they pass laws that generally help them at the expense of others. The internet is designed to be exactly the opposite of that. The internet is designed to be as fair and balanced as possible. Think back to when MySpace was the biggest social media platform out there, and then something better came along. And if MySpace had been able to somehow restrict Facebook, Facebook may never have risen up to the point where it sort of occluded the popularity of MySpace.
And
then Instagram
okay, but take
begins
it
to eclipse Facebook.
take it from a carrier standpoint, or somebody providing a service. You go to a baseball game, you go to Citi Field, Andrew, depending on how much you're going to pay for your ticket, you're going to get closer to the field. Why shouldn't a consumer, I'm playing devil's advocate here because I agree with you more than I don't, be able to say, I'm willing to pay more for the fastest possible service? It's not that you're excluded from it, but just like everything else in life, how much you're willing to pay will predicate how and the quality of your service.
Well, you're thinking of the user end of this. You're thinking as the consumer, but every consumer on the internet can also be the entrepreneur on the internet. That's the amazing thing about the internet. And so if I have to pay more to get top speed for whatever service it is, that means that if I then turn around and start a business, I'm going to be at a disadvantage compared to other people who can provide that and have the resources to pay for faster service or to pay for something better. It's supposed to be an even playing field so that every little guy, even Dominic, can compete on the
Providers, though, are starting to cry poverty here, where they're saying, okay, that sounds fine from an academic or even from a consumer perspective, but this is a business after all. It's not a not-for-profit enterprise, and you're dictating the terms of our business.
Right. I mean, I think the two least trusted entities in America are probably the federal government and then corporate America. And I think it comes down to who do you trust least on this issue. Then again, the internet was created by the government. The government created the internet, and I don't know if it was Al Gore that actually did it, but the government had something to do with it. It's certainly been commercialized. On its face, I tend to favor the net neutrality argument because I think, for exactly what Andrew's saying, you want that freedom on there to challenge, to compete, to always go after it. At the same level, I don't entirely trust the FCC not to start digging into it over the years and changing those freedoms as they are.
Well, listening to the good Republican here is always interesting because he's reasonable and it's appreciated. You listen to the yo-yos in Washington, they make the case that the government is the only agent of oppression. They make this across the board. And there are times when the government is an agent of oppression and needs to be, that's why we have a First Amendment. But a large corporation has just as much practical power to dictate the way you live as the government does. And I only wish there could be some sort of a balance coming, the O'Reilly balance, we'll call it, coming out of his party.
Right, because I mean the corporation's goal here, its mandate is to make money, and that's all, and that's what its mandate is. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But
the
Sununu's
of the world, to your point, those same Republicans in Washington, many of them argue that today's ruling will stifle innovation or capitalism.
It'll do the opposite. It will make it possible for the little startup to compete fairly with the big established guy without having to pay 3 times what the big established guy pays.
Which to me seems like a Republican. I'm surprised where the Republicans are on this one. To me, the conservative argument is it's for the greatest freedom.
Well, let me ask the devil's advocate question, because this is the one question about net neutrality that I have, and that is Netflix. Netflix uses up some enormous chunk of the internet at any one time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an enormous chunk.
Yep.
So if they're clogging up the internet, shouldn't they or their customers have to pay more? I mean, that's one of the arguments, because they are slowing down ostensibly everybody else because they're using up so much of the internet.
Charge by usage. You can still say if you use 27 units, you pay more than if you use 2 units. But you can't charge different prices for 27 units at a different speed. Look.
No, but the argument to Andrew's point is, using the same highway model, that Netflix is taking up 2 lanes at a time of a 4-lane highway because of how much of the file is taking up bandwidth, exactly this, taking up space, while other people are using, and everyone has to share the same highway to continue with the metaphor here. So they were the big winners, I think, today, are those people that are using large components of that traffic simultaneously.
One last point. This is an example, and I think that's one of the reasons you get this ideological response from Republicans, of where the government coming in to protect citizens is a really good thing. Now, obviously, you can, if your meme is that the government is always wrong, And
Well,
it's
I think you touched on part of the argument for Republicans is that the president, in their viewpoint, got too involved in this process. This wasn't strictly at the FCC. Now, of course, they're all political appointments and everything else, so I know that. But the argument for a lot of Republicans is the president made this his pet project, and he got involved. This wasn't the FCC making the decision. This was the administration.
even the president is entitled to his opinion.
Richard, are you saying that regulation actually serves to benefit consumers?
What? We can do an infomercial about this. Are you saying?
Are you saying?
My God, I never realized.
Bill,
that.
I'll hold the tea.
Bill, are we saying that regulation is good for consumers?
No, but if you don't, I mean, even Republicans would concede. Republicans are for limited regulation, certainly I am. But you need, for example, antitrust laws in the country. If you don't have that, you're going to have people run roughshod. You're going to have monopolies.
So, Andrew,
most Republicans agree with
government good. All right, now we got not one, but two online questions as they relate to net neutrality for you tonight. And you can head over to Facebook and Twitter to sound off now that it's a level playing field. Do you think that all data on the internet ought to be treated the same here? And Andrew gave an example of Netflix. Should everything, be in the same playing field? And also, we want to know whether you believe providers or users of high-volume web services like the aforementioned Netflix ought to be asked to pay more for web access. All right, when we come back, we will take a look at Governor Chris Christie's pension problem. We've talked about it on the show before, but you're going to get a position over the years that has gotten so contorted from the man on your screen as it relates to pensions in the Garden State here. We're going to talk about from 2011 to just this week, just how those positions have changed and changed and changed. Stay with us.